until they kept winning, defeating the 6-seeded Suns, who were the betting favorites in the first round. They then did the unthinkable, knocking off the defending champs, beating Denver 3 times on their home court before ultimately losing to the Mavs in 5 games. Here's Minnesota on their season being over before they wanted.
We never clicked all together as a team in this series. Not even one game. I think that was the main thing. In the last 2 series, we was all clicking at one time, making shots and stuff. We wasn't clicking at one time now. It's a lot of our guys' first time being in this light. So, especially me, it's my first time. So we'll be ready, man. We'll be all right.
We haven't tapped into our full potential, or even close to it yet. So it's obviously frustrated, but it's really exciting too. And I'm aware of the noise, and people have different opinions. People sometimes say things that they don't even believe themselves. Eventually they're going to respect, and eventually they're going to be inspired at some point. But until then, I'm going to keep being the best version of myself.
Okay, so they didn't reach their full potential, and they weren't clicking and on the same page. Perk, first react to the sound, and then I'll ask my question.
Well, let me say this. First of all, Anthony Edwards is right, okay? I'm not making no excuses, but they're going to go through growing pains. They hit, a well-coached Dallas Maverick team, and what happened is when you start having that type of success as a young ball club, then you start seeing uncharacteristic type behavior, right? You see Jaden McDaniels. He's trying to make plays and do things out of his role. You start seeing Rudy. He wouldn't get his big ass out of the paint and kept asking for the ball on the low block. He had the most shot attempts in the first quarter for the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Get out of there, play your role, play the dunker spot, come up and set a screen, right? You start seeing guys do things because, one, the outside noise started to creep in and everybody started telling you to do more instead of staying in your role in that locker room. Number 2, I don't want to hear nothing from Rudy Gobert, okay? At the end of the day, when it comes down to him, he was outplayed this series by a rookie in Derek Lively. Derek Lively, it may not show up in the box score, and that's why you cannot go to the box score all the time when you're talking about games. You have to watch it with the eye test. Derek Lively played his role to the T. He outshined Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy. This guy's playing like a veteran right now. I expect the Timberwolves to get better, but at the end of the day, this is a humbling moment for them where they go into the offseason, look themselves in the mirror, and figure out how each individual can get better.
Okay, so Perk, here's what I need to know. Should the Wolves make dramatic offseason changes? What needs to happen?
No, they shouldn't. I mean, look, you run it back with the same ball club. You're not going to get better talent than Karl-Anthony Towns, even if you try to trade him. He's still one of the top 5 most talented bigs in the game. He's right up there with Jokic and Anthony Davis when you talk about his offensive skill set. Anthony Edwards, he's going to get better, right? We saw him grow through this Western Conference Finals. He averaged a little bit above 8 assists a game, right? We saw his playmaking, making guys around him better. That grew. Naz Reid is going to get better. You run it back. You run it back with this ball club. You give them another run at it. They'll be perfectly fine.
So, okay, when you're talking about the Wolves' future, you have to kind of take a step back and understand everything that's going on.
Ownership.
The Wolves are headed for absolutely, Stephen A. And they're headed for basically a financial cliff, okay? Because now that the season is over, Ant Edwards, rightfully so, after making the All-NBA team, just hit the Supermax as a 4-year player. Congrats to him. He got a $40 million extra bonus on his contract for making All-NBA. That contract starts July 1st. Karl Towns made All-NBA 2 years ago, signed a humongous $250 million contract extension. He was within his contract, but his new contract begins on July 1st. He's getting a $13 million raise over what was already a $35 million salary. They have a bunch of other high-dollar players on the roster, including Rudy Gobert, who, by the way, is eligible for an extension this summer they're going to have to deal with. They just signed Jaden McDaniels to a $130 million contract that starts July 1st, guys, and he earned it. He was second-team all-defense, was a huge player on this team. We are in Minneapolis here. We are not in New York City. This team is not owned by someone worth $100 billion like the LA Clippers. And not only that, the ownership situation is in flux. The Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez are in a legal battle with Glenn Taylor about who's going to own the team going forward. Even if it is Glenn Taylor, he has only paid a little bit of luxury tax in the entire time he's owned the team. He'd have to pay more luxury tax this next season than all of his years owning the Wolves combined, probably doubled. So when you think about the Wolves, you can't think about whether this team needs to change. You have to think about whether they can afford to keep this team together.
I personally think that the ownership situation will be resolved shortly. I'm of the mindset, Wendy, that you know what, when you've already invested $600 million because you were due to invest $900 million at a $1.5 billion price tag that Glenn Taylor had ordained the franchise to be worth. I'm sure that was a huge mistake on his part, because now that you've seen the elevation of Anthony Edwards and the box office appeal he has, it's probably doubled the value of the franchise. So he probably feels he's getting hosed or whatever. So clearly you can understand why he would want to change course, but you don't get to do that. I think that Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry are smart enough to make sure that the stuff in the language is ironclad. And I think all of this stuff about Glenn Taylor is that Glenn Taylor didn't want to see, he didn't want somebody else standing at center court with the trophy hoisted, and he wasn't a part of that, because you know the majority owner is going to be the one that's right there in front of in last night's case, Ernie Johnson, for example, even though Mark Cuban was right over there in the vicinity and celebrating with the rest of the team. Glenn Taylor, I think that kind of moment was important to him, but it didn't happen. I think ultimately it'll be resolved, and you'll see Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry get a majority stake in the franchise, which is what they were aiming to do, but obviously that remains to be seen. Here's what I would tell you about what Perk is saying. Perk, I don't disagree with you. I don't think that there's wholesale changes that should be made, but I do think one has to consider what you're going to do with Karl-Anthony Towns. Not because we're going to indict his play, even though obviously he shot 24% from three-point range this series, all right, and was not that impressive, albeit with the exception of one game, really. I'm not counting last night because they got obliterated in the first quarter. We ain't giving them credit for that. You got to look at it and ask yourself, is that the ideal match for an Anthony Edwards, number one? And number two, what could you get for Karl-Anthony Towns because of how talented he is and how much he would work for another team compared to how somebody would work with Anthony Edwards instead of him? Those are the kind of questions that I think have to be answered. Again, I'm inclined to roll with you, Perk, and not condone or support making wholesale changes, but I will say that, I gotta see what I could get for him because of his talent and the value he could potentially bring, particularly since I'm limited in stuff that I could do in free agency and beyond. I'd have to at least look at it.
Well, here's the thing, right? I think this team, when you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, they were built to beat the defending champs, right? That's why you had the double big lineup. You had Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy playing alongside one another. But what the Dallas Mavericks exposed is they exposed that double big lineup. And to be honest with you, Wendy talked about Rudy being eligible for a contract extension. That's the person that I'm looking to shop. I'm looking to build around Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. Again, Karl-Anthony Towns' talent is like no other. When it comes to his skill set, his ability to shoot the ball from the three, his ability to go to the low block, take you off the dribble, finish in the paint either hand. So at the end of the day, I'm looking at this, all that, right? One leg turnarounds, whatever you want, he got it. I'm looking at the Rudy situation, and I'm like, is it really worth it, right? Like, I know he's the defensive player of the year. I'm not even about to go down that path. I done already read him his rights on how I feel about that, but that's what I'm looking at. Jay McDaniels, he's going to be there defensively. Anthony Edwards, he's going to be there defensively. Karl-Anthony Towns' next step in his career is taking that Anthony Davis-type leap. Being a guy that could play both sides of the basketball. Anthony Davis, all NBA, all defensive team. That's what Karl-Anthony Towns' goal needs to be going into next season.